Spacebird Media.
Why do so many people find solace in the crackle of a vinyl record? Let's dive in. This isn't just another vinyl podcast. It's a journey into the heart of recovery through the universal language of music. Each week we share powerful stories of overcoming addiction and life's toughest challenges. Together, we'll uncover how the warmth of vinyl can guide us through moments of vulnerability and strength. So, drop the needle, lean in, and let the music heal. Let's get started.
This is Records and Recovery.
And welcome back to Records and Recovery, where every week we just love to bond over the fact that music heals our hearts. It helps us through times. It rocks us hard when we need it, melts our faces if necessary, but it definitely brings us together on a regular basis. And so I love not only when I get a chance to hear your stories, but get to hear stories from fellow DJs, because being a part of the Thasis Radio Network, I've met a lot of really great, talented people. Not really got to hear their story very much, so getting a chance to hang out with the one and only Stephen Edward, hanging out with us on this week's Records and Recovery. How are you, sir?
It's Mickey. A plus. And I say that because while I've been working with Thasis for a few years, I spent the past 33 years as a high school English teacher. So everything gets a grade. Right now I'm feeling A plus.
Nice. All right, good. Yeah. All right. Well, please always grade me on a curve. Drop my lowest test score and I'll be your best student. So, Steve,
right.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into radio, because I mean, obviously that's a transition. Like I've heard stories of members of KISS being a teacher and going from the classroom to the stage. So how did you get from the classroom to the mic?
Well, interesting, and we can go back, in time a little bit, but I was brought up in a very, very conservative Christian household, and so I was not allowed to listen to rock and roll until I was in 8th grade, which was like about 1978, and so it was like kind of like the disco era. Saturday Night Fever was coming out, and everything was disco. But I just always liked music. As an English teacher, I was working at a school that used to have a low power FM station, 88.5. And if you know anything about low power FM stations, they reach from about here to the doorknob. They don't really go that far.
Right.
And there's FCC requirements, and it's expensive to run an FM station. Anyway, it ran for 20 years, and then it shut down for 35. And so I had this idea in my head that the last 5 years of my career, I'd get that thing up running. And it took about that long to kind of figure out the licensing and how to stream, how to do the software. There's a lot of logistics, how to fund it.
Yeah.
And I finally was able to put all the pieces together so that in my last 2 years, we were streaming. And the neat thing about that was we were streaming from, coast to coast and from border to border, and then probably all over the world. But whereas 88.5 reached from here to the doorknob, we were now reaching people from Washington to Florida, up to Maine, down to California. So that's how I got involved in the Thasis Radio Network, because I was using Station Playlist, the same software that we use at Thasis. And so David Moss and I just sort of clicked, and we hit it off.
Yeah.
And I've been working there ever since.
I love that. So then what was that first, if it wasn't until, would you say 8th grade or 8?
8th grade, yeah.
All right,
yeah.
So 8th grade, what was that first artist that you were able to latch on to?
It's probably Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton, let's see, Paul McCartney and Wings. In the car, we would listen to, on vacations, we'd, hit pop music, and Neil Diamond was a big one growing up. I'll tell you, the very first song that grabbed me, though, I'll never forget this. I was sleeping over at Grandma's house, and I was out walking around one summer day, and I heard someone had a transistor radio on their bike. They were kind of like right on the sidewalk with me, and Elton John and Kiki D were playing "Don't Go Breaking My Heart," and I'm like, what is that song? That's incredible. I never heard anything like it. That's the very first song I ever fell in love with. And so music's always been just a part of my day. I would wake up to music and I'd fall asleep to music.
See, it's crazy that you mentioned that one, because that when I ask the question to people, like, what's your earliest memory of music? For me, that is, like, I remember having the 45, playing it on the turntable ad nauseum, and that started my huge affinity for Elton, and, fell in love with all of his music at that point, and seen him, more than a handful of times. But there's something about that song. And if you hear Elton talk about it, it's like his least favorite of the catalog. It was kind of just like a throwaway, but became this massive song.
Oh, is that right? Well, for someone who was like 10, it was just perfect. It was the first pop song I really fell in love with.
That's awesome. Hanging out with Stephen Edward,
Yeah.
and as we continue with Records and Recovery, you talk about growing up in a Christian home. What were some of the early music, outside of a Sunday morning hymnal, what were some of those bands and artists that you were listening to in the Christian realm?
Just go back a little bit, because my dad was, he grew up on jazz. So rock and roll was, from the devil. You couldn't listen to rock and roll, so we'd listen to jazz. So the big bands, the 1940s. So I grew up with Jimmy Dorsey, Tommy Dorsey, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Vaughn Monroe. So, and all of those are still so nostalgic for me. Yeah. It'd be awesome if we had a 1940s, big band station. It's the music I grew up with. Well, one day, my dad left, and I must have been like 8 or 9. I'm like, I'm going to put on one of his records, and I'm going to crank it up. I'm going to really blast it. It was like some piano concerto, right? So I put it on. I was just blasting this piano concerto, and I forgot to turn off the stereo. So the next day, Dad says, were you listening to the stereo? And I said, yeah. And he goes, don't leave it on anymore. You're going to burn out the components. Now, in retrospect, what he should have said was, wow, what did you think about that piano concerto?
Right.
I mean, I'm listening to piano concertos on my own. So, Christian music-wise, we had the hymnal, and so we sang a lot of the old classic hymns, and then that was kind of part of like the Jesus rock movement and stuff like that. So lots of Kumbaya, and boy, if you give me a second to think, they were all part of Sunday school. And a lot of songs meant to help you memorize Bible verses.
Sure.
So I can still remember some of the Bible verses just because the songs were there,
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to, grow up in a house where contemporary Christian music, as it was becoming cooler, so bands like Petra, Res Band, Stryper, Whiteheart, they were embedding these scriptures into the songs. And so my brother and I didn't even realize it's kind of one of those things where it was the opposite. Like, we would hear it in the song first, and then we would hear it at church and go, ooh, that's from that Petra song we know and sing, So we were able to make the connection to know the address of the Bible verse they were singing about. Yeah. But still to this day, a lot of those lyrics are embedded in my head because they took the Bible and, you see that a lot even too. So, artists that are using worship music, they're taking the Psalms and lifting it for verses or choruses or whatever. So it's still there, but I hope at some point people do make that connection of, oh, it's not just a song lyric, it is the Word of God that's embedding into their hearts and heads.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing you bring up too, because fast forward into my teen years, I'd go off to summer camp, and one of the things they would offer is joining their choir, and they would sing, back then, the contemporary music. And so here I'm, singing songs that, my grandma sang, nothing wrong with that. But as for me, like 1980, 1982, what am I going to sing? Well, that choir director, I'll never forget the story. He said, the reason I'm doing this is I was driving down the road and I started to sing a beer commercial song, In the Land of Sky Blue Waters. And he goes, why not have a song that sticks in your head that lifts you up and edifies you? Yeah. So he gave us all this great music, and it really changed my life, because after that, then I joined high school choir and college choir, and then just yesterday, the church choir sang. The church choir where I go to church has been, it was disbanded, I guess. It was since the pandemic. So for 5 years, no church choir, and yesterday was our first day. All 8 of us were there.
That's nice. We're hanging out with Stephen Edward as we continue this week's episode of Records and Recovery. So when you are in that place of I need, especially, having the roots that you do in your faith, what is kind of that go-to album or band? Is it always something of faith, or is there kind of a catalog of, okay, this is Stephen's chill, I need to hear from the Lord today kind of playlist?
A lot of summer camp songs come to me. I mean, they're very, very repetitive, and so those have stuck with me. And then, to be honest with you, then my roots go deep into classical music. So, for instance, like Handel's Messiah, that's like a must play, especially during Christmas, and all those, based on text of Isaiah, whatever. So. I do not have the breadth of knowledge with contemporary Christian music, but now that we have the Dove, there's all sorts of music and melodies, and also, let's see. I want to make sure I capture my thought, because it's not exactly like Bible verses that right. The songs are. But it's Christian values, and so filling your spirit with something that's Christian value, rather than having empty calories, right. I suppose. But I will say I have an Amy Grant story.
All right.
So I was living in Vail, Colorado for a few years, and Amy Grant came to play, and we needed someone to drive her from her dressing room over to the venue. So I got to drive Amy Grant. And a golf cart. That's about it.
Now,
hey, how are you?
Yeah. Now, my encounter with Amy is great. She and I were at a radio event where we were bowling. We were on the same lane, and we both were terrible bowlers. So that's how we connected, was on that we were getting constant gutter balls. But it gave us a chance to just kind of talk and hang out a little bit. And so do you remember what some of those conversations were? Were you able to get past small talk?
No, it wasn't a very long trip. It was just like, hi, how are you? How are you enjoying this? You're going to really enjoy the weather here, because Vail in the summer is just so beautiful. So, yeah, okay, well, I'll pick you up after the show. It was kind of like, I felt like her dad.
Yeah. That's fantastic. You're listening to Records and Recovery. We're talking this week with Stephen Edward. As you think about, as a vocalist, is singing something you would want to do on a regular basis, or is it you just kind of hold it for Sunday mornings?
Yeah, I love singing. I was a vocal major my first year of college, a music major. I wanted to be a high school choir teacher, but I couldn't pass piano proficiency. And they would open up something, you have to play for it, play it on site. And I just couldn't do that. So I switched over to English, and I became a high school English teacher, which was awesome. But I love singing. Now I wish my voice were more beautiful, but it does that trick.
Right.
It does the trick. They let me in the choir.
Yeah, see, I was in choir before I got into band, but then as my voice deepened for radio, the singing part of it didn't translate well. So I just tell people, I'm the drummer. I can back you up. You take the mic. And fortunately, I married a vocalist who is way more proficient than anybody I've ever seen or heard.
Did, yeah.
So that's been a great duality, because she comes from the theater world, I come from the clubs.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see that come together on whether we're singing on Sunday mornings or we're writing worship music for the purpose, of Sunday mornings. It still gives us that
I didn't know you were a
connection.
drummer. Yeah.
Yeah, so my studio here is full on, so I have full kit.
Okay.
I did have both electric and acoustic, but now we're using that at church. So it's kind of, to bring that contemporary into, because I feel like today you kind of have to have a little bit of both. You can't just all be hymns, or it can't just all be organ. I like that now there's little nuances, at least within our services. We'll have a little bit of the traditional. We'll have a little bit of the contemporary. Sometimes it's old school. Sometimes it's brand new. But I love that it's always with the vibe of what you were talking about. Well, it might not necessarily be heavy in Scripture, but at least it's in the values aspect.
Yeah, right. Because pop music it can be empty calories where you're just trying to hook up with somebody and
Yeah.
hi, I love you. What's your name? It's that kind of deal. But I wish I could play an instrument. I've tried to play guitar for years and I can't do it. So I'm just kind of stay in my lane, and then if I can sing, I'll
All right.
sing, and,
So
and then do radio.
I'm going to be your accountability on that because I didn't learn piano until much later in life, and I regret it. I wish I had started, much younger. But it's not as hard as you think. Like nobody's going to ask you to sight read at this age, hopefully. So just sit down. As Paul McCartney says, we all have the same 12 notes that go to any song that has not been written yet. So I love the idea of just, especially from in a day and age as someone who leads worship, just learning chords. Like I say that to a lot of people. I'm like, listen, learn just basic chords on any instrument and you can jump in and play with the band because they're either going to be playing chord-driven charts, they're not going to be looking at sheet music, or they're going to be giving you the Nashville number system. And if you know that a 1, 4, 5 in whatever key you're in, you can jump in and play whatever you're proficient in. So I love that aspect. And
that's true. Yeah.
I love to see adults get into playing because I feel like as we get older, it keeps our minds sharp. Like it's an expression of our heart, right?
Well, I figure 30 years is going to happen whether I practice piano or not. So I may as well just go ahead and jump in. I have a little bit of background, and I actually have a little electric piano that I picked up. So I could easily do that.
I love that. This is Records in Recovery, hanging out with Stephen Edward. What do you feel like is the direction that, for at least me, regardless of the format, do you feel like that radio will always have a place? Or and I know we're, an anomaly in a world where, signals are going away and being sold off to monopolies. But do you feel like that as long as there's music, there'll always be a need and people's desire for radio?
Well, my short answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. Because I have my own Spotify playlists and YouTube playlists and things like that. But it's a lot of heavy lifting, and the algorithm can suggest some things. But what I appreciate about radio is let's just take a Thasis radio station. Like we do all the heavy lifting, so we can find things that go together and we mix it, we match it well. It's not just an algorithm; it's done thoughtfully, and so that's one thing I always appreciated about radio is that I can put it on and then I hear things that I know and enjoy, and then there's some new things too. So I think that radio is kind of like, even though there's a little dip, I think it's going to come back again because people appreciate what we do as programmers to do the heavy lifting of keeping you entertained.
Yeah. I love that idea of we do the heavy lifting because especially now that we have the dub, I love the idea of that if you're in that place of I don't really know how to talk to God right now, or I don't even know, like I'm so angry at the world, I don't even know that he's even listening to me. Like a song can kind of relax your spirit enough that you're like, okay, if this song is what they're saying God is really like, then I want to get to know that God. And it's what I like to call an on-ramp, right? So if a song is an on-ramp to get you to prayer, and then prayer is getting you to God, like it becomes a cycle. So sometimes the right song, man, it sounds like they wrote that song just for me. Well, God knows what we need before we know we need it, right? So I love the idea of radio being that, we'll carry the rocks for you. Here you go. Use what you need when you need it.
That's an interesting thing because too, we can get into a little theological discussion, like what is prayer, and Paul says I think it's Paul, right? It says be prayerful all the time, always be in constant prayer, and our life is a prayer, and even if you don't feel like it. So when you put this on, I think our spirit is trying to look for something that sometimes I can't even articulate. Sometimes my feelings are complex, and I don't know what to do, and so those moments where I'm maybe listening to the uplifting music on the Dove is prayer and worship. It's like just because like my little boy brain tells me that, well, prayer, you have to close your eyes and fold your hand, and then you have to like say words in your head, or maybe there's a formula. But I think it's much more complex than that. And as I get older, prayer becomes more sophisticated. And I'll tell you where this is coming from is people tend to end their prayer with "Amen," right? But it's become almost like, all right, God, now listen up. Take notes because I got a lot of stuff to pray about. This, and heal this person, and then amen. And it's like you're hanging up on God. Like, well, what if you didn't say amen? What if you just said, okay, thanks for listening, your turn, and you just like listen for a little while, or put on some uplifting music, or took a walk in nature and took a look at the beauty that's around you, or make a list of your blessings, or something like that, so that there's like it's a two-way street. Otherwise, you're just saying goodbye, and then you're kind of going off with your day.
Yeah, it's true. And that's one of the things I've struggled with. And within the last year, it's become easier for me to be in silence. Like I am that person. My wife will tell you, music is always on. I've always either got earbuds in or I've got,
I agree.
The turntable's on. Something is always playing. So oftentimes I've probably missed things that God has been trying to say to me. So he's had to use a song because there's no silence. There's no room in the margins for him to speak. And that's a great reminder.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, music is a funny thing because I was looking at the sign over your shoulder. Music is not to hear, it's to feel. And I think that we have different gateways into our soul, into our spirit. You know, it might be something that we see. With your five senses, you smell, feel, hear, touch, taste. But I think music is extraordinary because it pulls on me emotionally. It's not just something I hear. It's something. It's like it hits me in two spots.
Yeah. Well, and I always attribute this to a Mother Teresa quote, but I may be wrong. But I've always heard the comment of that: if you sing, you pray twice. Because it's your heart, spirit, and soul all coming together through the lyrics of whatever it is that you're singing or humming or whistling or whatever. And I love that idea because as a music person, even when music's not on, there's always a song that's stuck in our heads, right? It's always coming, whether it's a song that annoys us or hopefully a song that blesses us. And I love that too because a lot of times, and I come from Southern Baptist background, now Episcopalian, where as a kid, it was always hellfire and brimstone, you tell everybody your testimony. I like just being able to talk about the songs that have affected my life. And then my testimony comes out through the songs because then I can go back to, 1983 or 2011 or whatever it was. And whoever the artist may have been that God used at that time. That's why I hold John Lennon in, a high place among the Fab Four because he was just so real and raw. And while not necessarily his musics are, always God edifying, it at least was in a place when I was just that angsty teenager and I needed to know that I could be that candid with my emotions and God was big enough to receive it, right? And so I love that no matter what music it is or where we are with him, he knows how to reach us. We just have to, at some point I believe we do acknowledge, man, God sent me this band or this artist or this album at a time that I needed it, which then led me to the church or led me to listen to Amy Grant or Stephen Curtis Chapman or whatever it was, because there's always the mirror of it, right? If you listen to this in one side of genre, there's always a Christian equivalent. It's just a matter of doing the research to find it.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. There are things that anchor me, music that anchors me, and things that like I can reach back in my childhood. And I think that's part of the nostalgia of growing up with like some of those old hymns. Is there a song, a band, something that you remember from being a younger man, or is there something now where you're like right here, like this really meets me where I am?
Well, so, I mean, the honesty of it is, growing up in a Southern Baptist church where rock and roll was told it was bad, and as contemporary Christian music was coming up, and there were drums, and there were loud guitars and screaming vocals, so bands like Petra, Stryper definitely topped the list for me because they looked like the music that I liked and was being told was wrong, but it had the lyrics of what I was being told was right. So for me, a Stryper, Soldiers Under Command, or Petra, More Power to You, those albums were huge in giving me an identity in my faith so that I could then be free to be who I was. And so that was kind of the entry gate.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah,
just
and that's
that
an interesting
entry.
thing too, because we get the sound of rock and roll. That's the music that we know and understand, and then you get like the lyrics that are edifying. And so, music is music. Whether it's guitar or a drum doesn't make it evil or. But it does. I mean, it's music we understand, and so it can be very, very edifying. Jars of Clay, is that kind of like the same time period?
Jars of Clay was 90s, so that would have been that was kind of the next era of contemporary Christian, because Jars of Clay not only had crossover success in the mainstream with that first album, so it not only was a meeting of the two worlds, like the world was noticing bands like Jars of Clay, DC Talk, PAX 217, Reliant K. There were a lot of meshovers, and what was cool about it is it showed that genres are only things that we give it in the flesh.
Yeah.
Like, we call this country, we call this pop, we call this rock. When, especially if you talk to most Christian artists today, they'll say, I'm just a music artist, but my faith comes out, so therefore I have been deemed a contemporary Christian artist, or I've seen more success through, contemporary Christian radio versus country or pop because of where it's been accepted. Because once you label something, then it's immediately shut out to anything else. So when a world where things were really starting to mesh together, that was kind of an exciting time, because, growing up at a time and an age when contemporary Christian music was, the underground, or it was a 2-hour block program on the talk station on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon. Now you've got networks worldwide, you've got stations locally, bringing in concerts, and then seeing not only the Christian station at the Jars of Clay show, but the alternative station or the rock station was there too, because you're both playing them. So there's been all of this incarnation of revamps of contemporary Christian formats, and now worship is kind of the staple. A lot of it has been grounded in the Tomlins, the Crowders, the elevation worship, all of that stuff. But again, it's having another elevation, no pun intended, because artists like Forrest Frank and Gavin and, all these, pop and rap artists are now saying, I have a voice, and the generation that didn't grow up on all the stuff that we've been talking about today, to them, it's all brand new, but it's right in the vein of, I like Taylor Swift, or I like 50 Cent, or whatever. And so they don't have to be told no on the genres they like. They can find the styles, and that's what the Dove has been about, is trying to marry those together so that in a day and age where music no longer splits generations, it brings us together because there is common ground. One
of the biggest crossover bands of all time is the Eagles, who made it on the country charts and then the pop charts as well. And then I was looking through the playlist that we have on the Dove, and like, for instance, like Jelly Roll, we play Jelly Roll on Cool.fm, Hit Q, our top 40 station, and on the Dove, and on Country Jams. I mean, so you get, are you seeing that more and more where, like we talk about, like, fitting into genres, where like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to sing what I can sing, what's authentic, and you put it on your station. I'm not going to pigeonhole myself.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's been the thing too, as we launched the Dove, it really was a matter of the heart of the artist. Because again, in a day and age where, for me as a programmer, I'm always trying to break those walls, because yes, it sounds country-esque, or yes, it sounds hip-hop-esque, but these people are just playing a style that they either grew up on, or that they're naturally gifted in, or that's just how they interpret this particular song. And so a Jelly Roll can go from a country to a hip hop to a pop, and it's effortless for him, because to him, he's not labeling himself. So I don't want to label an artist. If just a one and done song from them fits what works for us, we're going to play it. But if it's also being lavished on other formats, great, embrace them, because the heart of that person is that they're genuine in who they are with God, and you'll get to know that by listening to their song, no matter what format that it's coming from.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too.
We've been hanging out, Records and Recovery, this week with Stephen Edwards. Stephen, before I let you go, man, what do you love about where you are with God right now?
What I what I love about God is that God has given me a lot of opportunities. So I moved, and then we're trying to find a good church fit, and we found a good church fit, and they really need us. I'm helping with their web design now. We started the church choir. I've been posting a lot on social outlets to try to invite people, and just trying to grow the church, just like trying to help fan the flames of faith. And so, there's a thing where, you get a calling or an opportunity, and I want to say yes. Like, here I am, God, here I am.
Yeah, so great. Well, Stephen, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for hanging out this week.
All right, thanks, Ace.
Records and Recovery is a Spacebird Media production and a part of the Thasis Radio Network. Find more episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts or at thasis.com.